Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your attendance today to this Council Cabinet meeting at Derby City Council on Wednesday, the 16th of November, 2022 at 4 o'clock. We'll go straight to the agenda. Any apologies, please, Karen?
Andy Smith and Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Caring deputising for Councillor Skelton now.
Is that all right, Chair?
Fine, thank you. Receipt of petitions at item 3. I don't believe there are any.
No.
Identification of urgent items to which calling will not apply.
There are none.
Declarations of interest from anybody, please? No? Good. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October 2022, which I've reviewed and I'm okay with. Any comments or observations? Seconder? Councillor Eyre, thank you. Item 7 then, recommendations from Exec Scrutiny Board meeting last night, which there are a few. Councillor Repton's here, and as has become common practice, it's okay, we'll deal with each recommendation at each item, as we normally do. So that takes us on to item 8, which is a recommendation from the Children and Young People Board. Can put that for us. Andy's not here, so Yvonne, could you cover it off for us, please?
Sure. In terms of what the board resolved and how they got to here, I don't really know that. The chair's not here, I believe. In terms of the item 1, we already do this, but if the board want us to give it a name, I think we can do that and establish that for them. To note the progress, so number 2 is to note the progress on small children's residential homes project. Again, noted, accept that recommendation. To note the submission of capital bill bid to the DFE. Again, note that. And then the 4th one, to recommend that Council Cabinet consider options for using in-house children's homes and to consider the viability of existing provision to see if it can be utilised wherever possible. I'm just so severely frustrated because either they weren't listening to what the officers had to say in the meeting, or they weren't at the meeting, or they're just being totally blank about it. But this is what we do. This is what officers do all the time. So yes, I'm happy to take the recommendation. I find it a bit insulting, if I'm being honest, Chair. However, you know, the officers work so hard to make sure that all of our in-house provision is utilised where it can safely be done. There are obviously reasons why some of them aren't being used at the moment, which I know that the Scrutiny Board were fully informed of. I would say that we're trying to make sure that we have the best provision for our children and young people. Sometimes that will mean that we won't be able to use our own in-house provision, but wherever possible we do. The officers work extremely hard to make sure that that happens where it can. So again, I'll accept the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you very much. We obviously appreciate the Scrutiny Committee looking into such things, even if we are a little bit disappointed with the outcome, which shows a degree of lack of understanding as to where we're at with things. Any comments, questions from elsewhere? The Executive Scrutiny Board looked at this last night and resolved to note the report. So, Cabinet, there's 4 notes from the board there, and Councillor Williams is prepared to accept them in principle. Is that okay? Can they be agreed? Agreed, thank you. Item 9 then is a Cabinet member response to an adult health and scrutiny topic review. Who's going to deal with this? Yes, Roy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to formally thank the Adults and Health Scrutiny Review Board for the topic review they did on protecting care home residents and staff. There were a number of recommendations put forward by the board, and the majority of those recommendations were already in train or were not something that Derby City Council had control of. I've been through the recommendations one by one, responded to them as honestly and carefully as I could, and those are shown at the appendix to the report. The recommendation is to agree my response to the topic review, and I believe that executive scrutiny last night noted the report.
Correct, Councillor Webb. Yes, the Exec Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report. Your responses to the recommendation or the questions from the review are there in print. Any questions, any comments? Yes, Councillor Shank.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to put on record thanks to the Adults Health Scrutiny Board, and particularly the work the Chair has done on this in pulling the report together. It's pretty difficult for all the scrutiny boards with limited resources to do these reviews. It's positive, and I'm glad Roy's confirmed it's his response rather than an officer response. I think it's positive that it's been recognised that more can be done to promote the access or promote access to the care system, and also to promote some sort of carer awards, whether we incorporate that into some of our existing stuff or some done separately. I think that's really important to recognise that. What's really disappointing is a number of the recommendations have either just been noted or, I believe, responsibility shifted back to whether it's the NHS or somebody else. So we had quite a complex review or presentation at the council briefing last week, and it's obvious that the whole care system is pretty complex. But I think the gist of what the scrutiny board's recommendations is to provide some sort of overarching leadership around the provision of care, and act as an advocate and encourage partnership working. And I think a lot of the specific answers to some of the points just abdicates that responsibility. So I'd encourage you maybe not to take this report today and just go back and review some of those answers, because I think with not too much effort, more can be done in creating this care forum and proactively work in partnership with a number of organisations, rather than, as the recommendations state, distancing ourselves from them and putting it back to somebody else. It seems not in the best spirit of partnership working to me. So if you don't mind, Chair, and maybe you want to put this to Roy, is just maybe review this once again and then come back with a better set of recommendations, because I think more of this can be accepted if looked at a bit more holistically.
Okay, thank you. I will put it back to the Cabinet member. I'm sure he's happy to defend his record on this type of thing. So, Councillor Webb.
Yes, I think I clearly acknowledge that there is work going on with the integrated care system, and as Councillor Shanker said, there was a members' briefing on that and the work that's being done, and I do actively participate as Cabinet member in the Integrated Care Partnership, and I'm currently chair of that, so moving some of these issues forward is understandable from my point of view as Cabinet member, being jointly developed between health, social care and with the community and voluntary sector. There are issues in my responses that are out with the responsibility of the City Council, and I have been honest enough to identify those and to make it clear where we can respond positively, we have, and Councillor Shanker has mentioned a couple of those examples. I can't add anything to this report at this time. It's a retrospective report, so these are the responses to what the situation was when the review took place. So I can't go, therefore, and review this again in light of where we currently are, because things have moved forward quite dramatically since then.
And of course are in constant review as a result. Okay, any other questions, comments? No? All right, well, it's recommendation 2.1 in the report. Can we agree that, Cabinet? Thank you. Agreed. So item 10 then is the report into the Derwent floods in November 2019. I'm going to do this. Good reading.
Thank you, Chair. That's me. So, as lead local flood authority, the City Council is required to carry out formal investigations of significant flood events in our city. And the 8th of November 2019 was such a significant event, and this report details the investigation into that flood event. The same event also triggered an investigation by Derbyshire County Council, as they're also a local lead flood authority, of the impact of the flooding upstream in the Derwent, particularly around Matlock. So this report covers the impact in Derby City. It covers 12 sites that were impacted, and of those there was invasive flooding on 5 sites involving 7 commercial properties and 1 residential property, and flooding to the highway, causing a number of road closures and blackouts to street lighting. So the report is a really valuable analysis and detailed insight into what happened. So the rainfall and ground conditions preceding the event, the detail of the individual sites impacted, and the maps of the water flows and where they were designed as floodplain and functioned as expected or didn't. The report confirms it's the highest peak in the Derwent we've seen in 85 years, and it details the responsibility of the various different agencies involved in dealing with flooding. The recommendations are laid out at 4.7, and some of those are quite general and some of those are more specific and technical. I'm sure Cabinet is more than aware that the Council's primary mitigation against flood and to defend against flood is the Our City, Our River project, which is really important and fundamental programme we have throughout the city, working very closely with the Environment Agency, and that is our biggest impact in defending our city from future events. It was only partly in place at the time of the 8th of November 2019, but it had a direct benefit even so, and since then obviously more work has been gone on phase 2 for O'Call. The recommendations in the report are very much in line, as you would expect, with the Council's local flood risk management strategy and inform our capital programme priorities and how we manage our assets. And all of those tend to work with collaboration with the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water, Network Rail, etc. So this report really provides for Council a high level of professional independent scrutiny on the causes and impacts of the event in November 2019, and it adds to our ongoing evidence base and will be published on our website to make sure we're open and transparent in what the findings are for our population. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. I think the first thing to do is to note and acknowledge and thank the officers for a very detailed report into a potentially very dangerous situation. The recommendations are there. The report went to exec scrutiny last night, and in a nutshell the recommendation was to for us to try and ensure that the County Council and the Environment Agency look at upstream problems with the river. And as you said, they carried out their own investigation and have reports that no doubt will be shared and compared and built with the Environment Agency. Martin, anything to add?
No, I think it's encapsulated, although that as long as we make sure that the report goes to County Council and the Environment Agency, because there was the concern that, one would hope that they'll be looking at those issues, but we just need to emphasise that, because the more they can do upstream, the more we will be protected downstream. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely makes sense. But I'm reassured that there is joined up thinking here, above and below, to be honest, on the river, because it goes all the way. So, yes, we can certainly accept that recommendation. Any other comments or reports? Yes, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair, for those that support for looking at the upstream situation. It's a small matter and it's a sort of technical matter. In some of the plans, the keys aren't as expressed as well as they might be. They're a bit ambiguous. And they're also one of the typos and lack of clarity in the document. And I just thought it'd be helpful to enable officers to make final amendments with the report writer's approval, and for that to be allowed by Cabinet before it goes on for formal publication. So I just ask, Chair, that if you do that, it's things like there's lack of clarity about which pumping station they're talking about, or which underground substation that Western Power have had problems with. There's a sort of half a sentence missing at one point. So they're little bits, but it's just a technical thing.
To go through those small items with Councillor Kerr.
Yes, officers offered that last night, absolutely, at scrutiny.
It was just, Chair, to make sure that Cabinet would be happy with that.
We can agree any minor alterations that don't affect the report. The effect of the report, that's not a problem. Steve, I think your portfolio, anything to add?
No, thank you, Chair. No, nothing really more to add. I think it was right to have this as a platform for this important piece of work. And yeah, I think there's a lot of joined up working going on anyway, but just to reiterate the recommendation, we will be sharing it with our partners, so happy to approve. Thank you.
And those recommendations are 2.1 to 2.3. Can they be agreed? Thank you. So item 11 then is the City of Courtshire Legacy. What a fantastic opportunity it was to bid into the City of Culture process, and this report talks about capturing the benefits and using the benefits of that process well into the future. You Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this report sort of plots a concrete step on securing the legacy from the city's successful long listing for UK City of Culture 25. And as the leader has said, it was an incredible process we went through, and a great thing, I think, for our city overall. And the report also builds on the city's commitment broader than the UK City of Culture bid to culture generally. So we understand that culture has a major part in underpinning our city's ambition for a generation, this centre, but also the broader contribution that culture makes to health, well-being, economic and social wealth. So a real sense we are committed to culture in this city, so how do we maintain that moving forward? So we've been working with the Arts Council, critical, obviously, regional national player to the council, and taking experience from across the UK in how do we create a collaborative approach to really build on that legacy and maintain that sense of sustainable culture, activity and opportunity across the city. So building on our original culture board, we had a partnership board, and the strategic group of cultural organisations that we work with generally, how do we get the investment across the whole of our city and all those sectors into the future of culture in the city? We saw some of that City of Culture bid where we had sponsor opportunities offered by business organisations across the city, and a real sense of the whole city coming together and saying they wanted to be a part of the bid. So how do we capture that interest in culture actually into our cultural life in the city? So this cultural partnership, developed through what's called a cultural compact study funded by the Arts Council, has supported this model of a cultural partnership which will create a significant step change in how sustainable our cultural sector will be. It will bring in other pledges and players to provide funding and support for culture. It provides a platform for greater collaboration across the sector, so reducing duplication, inefficiency and maximising what we have in our cultural sector already and our cultural offer. and it produces also, really importantly, a vehicle for the potential bid for UK City of Culture 29. And that was an important point that was reinforced by our feedback from the City of Culture bid panel and Sir Phil Redmond, that our ability to actually be able to run a whole series of events for a whole year requires a vehicle with some robustness beneath it. And we knew we were weak in that area. Our bid was well regarded, but we need a vehicle to be able to give the assurance to any bid process we have got the ability to deliver that year of events at an international scale. So the report has been developed and been co-produced with our partners across the sector, and it really asks Cabinet at this stage to approve in principle the creation, the convening of a cultural partnership, and for this partnership to be to appoint a chair and some co-chairs. It's quite important that the idea of an independent chair outside of the cultural sector and two co-chairs, one with broad experience and one from one of our diverse communities, to really get that involvement there at the beginning. And that board that will look at the options appraisal about what's the best operating model for that partnership. And then the report on how that would look would be brought back to Cabinet with any implications that there might be for the Council of that partnership and that being created more formally. So it's very much a statement of intent, and I would say that the Arts Council have been really supportive, working with us on developing this. This is a model that exists nationally as a network of cultural partnerships across the country that have done a variety of different really positive things around building culture in their places, and the Arts Council are very keen to continue funding this with us, and there's £15,000 of funding from them to help this development. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to add to our thanks to our cultural partners here for committing to getting involved in this, and those people that give up their time and efforts to build on what we're trying to do. Martin, Councillor Repton, your committee looked at it last night and came up with a recommendation around encouraging us to lobby government for funding. It's not, I have to say, it's not just government where we need to lobby for funding, but and yes, there are some tough times ahead of us at the moment, but at the moment the commitment is mainly in time and effort in terms of the partnership working. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think I'd like to say that the exec scrutiny fully supports these proposals, and that they're quite exciting, but it was keen to make sure that they're not undermined by the lack of funding either locally or nationally, because we know the challenges locally and nationally because of what's going on in the financial markets. And around the country, city centres like Derby face an existential challenge that only a national joined-up response can address, because we've seen the problems of out-of-town shopping, online shopping, we've seen the problems about the pandemic, we've seen about working from home. So some of our city centres are dying on their feet. And unless there's the recognition, nationally as well as locally, and only that way can we start to address these real problems, and only that way can strategies such as this for a cultural partnership actually work. We need more niche shopping in the city centre. We need more attractions to get people into the city centre. But I think we need to be talking to our partners nationally to make sure that that can succeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. We will continue to do that and lobby government. Councillor Smell, your responsibility portfolio. Did you want to just mention the success we had with the Arts Council funding as well?
It's almost taking the thunder out of, almost steal my thunder, Chair. Now, first of all, I want to just thank, in particular, Mike Brown, who has been working very, steadfast in the background, deep conversations with many cultural partners, myself included, about how we develop this cultural partnership. And it's quite exciting times ahead, because the City of Culture bid really put us in a strong foundation to help us push forward. And also got to thank Rachel for helping bring in partners together, because years gone by, 5-6 years ago, we didn't have this cultural partner relationship in the city. It was quite fractious, it was quite fraught, there was competitiveness between each cultural bid because they were vying for the same pots of money. bringing everyone together around a table has really helped materialise and foster a really strong partnership, not with just us as a local authority, but also with our cultural partners. And it's been rewarded recently. The Arts Council England, for Derby and Derbyshire, I think it is to the tune of 2.7 million for the whole of Derby and Derbyshire of new Arts Council funding, which is probably the most it has ever seen to date. An uplift in funding for Derby museums, Baby People, Symphonia Fever, who's been a steadfast partner in helping us to develop our strategy with the Dali concert. So it is quite exciting in times ahead. So this vehicle helps us create that partnership forward at arm's length with the council and helps bridges everyone together. So I just want to thank everyone involved for how we develop our cultural strategy whilst in very difficult times. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Schenker.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be brief. Just a couple of points to make. Yeah, an excellent bid, and lots of people got behind our bid to try and get the City of Culture here in Derby. Unfortunately, the vision that people and partners here in Derby saw wasn't supported by others. And lots of work went in to do this, and I welcome this report to create a partnership, just as I was saying earlier on about the Care Forum. I think working with partners has got to be a positive step forward, so we should do that. My concern is, Chair, just as the Cabinet Member has been speaking, the Cabinet Member for Finance has had culture bolted onto the side of his portfolio. The Cabinet Member for Communities has had parts of the old portfolio bolted onto their portfolios. And also with this proposed restructure still, which I'm not sure exactly where we are with the restructure in our directors and senior officers. From memory, the last one I saw didn't have a Director for Culture, Leisure and Tourism. So I suppose my question is, how do we balance off the importance of having a focused team, both administration-wise and senior leadership team-wise, here at the Council, so when we're engaging with our partners, they know that the full commitment of the Council is there, as well as the work that we can encourage our partners to do.
Thank you. It actually shows how leisure and culture has a valid effect across the portfolios within the council. So it's not one person's sole responsibility. We as a cabinet take a collective responsibility for leisure and culture in the city, and to marry that with our ambition and our vision for the city as we go forward. So, Councillor Kerr, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a very important move forward from what was a disappointment, but to be able to move forward with more strength and more vision is definitely the way to go. Just as part of setting up and thinking about the new structures and inclusivity, not just in terms of our various communities that we think of within the city centre area, but to maximise both those new organisations. You mentioned Baby People. Well, 20 years ago, Baby People was really small. What are the new ones? What are the new little organisations that have the potential to be significant in Derby? And making sure that we are encouraging and nurturing them as part of this thinking, because if we do get City of Culture, that could be a real launch pad for those small organisations and help fill some of the gaps that the judges felt that we would have been struggling to fill this time round. So just as an awareness of that, and that needs to be both looking citywide and small, but also into our geographic communities to make sure our geographic communities feel included as well.
I take your point. I mean, maybe we should ask Baby People if they should become adolescent people now or something like that. Changing them, they've been going that long, but no, culture is around the city in spades. There's culture everywhere, and we want to bring them into this forum, into the city as a whole, and experience and delight in the cultural offer that various communities have. So I agree with that. Any other thoughts, comments? No? In that case, we have recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Can they be agreed? Thank you. That moves us on then to item 12, the private sector housing and health impact assessment. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Your cabinet paper is really a summary of a very long and detailed report that was conducted by your public health team here at the council. The full report is titled Private Sector Housing and Health Impact Assessment. And that report looks at all private sector housing within the city, so not just private rented accommodation, but it includes home-owned properties as well. It looks very closely at the link between people living in poor quality housing and the impact that poor quality housing has on their health. It's based on the English Housing Survey. That's a national survey the government uses to estimate housing conditions across the country. And as we're seeing the following item, Chair, that is likely to therefore mean that the figures in this report are a conservative estimate, if anything. But nevertheless, this report makes a really strong link between demonstrating that poor quality housing has a significant impact on people's health and therefore on the people who access healthcare services and the cost to the public purse as well, Chair. Your cabinet paper pulls out lots of examples from the more detailed report. I won't go through those all, Chair. I'll just pick out several that stand out for me. In relation to those wards that have the highest proportion of Category 1 hazards for cold homes, and a Category 1 hazard is a hazard that would have an immediate risk to somebody's health. So the wards with the highest number of Category 1 hazards for cold homes were Arboretum and Abbey, and they are 75 and 50% higher, respectively, than the Derby average for the death rate for respiratory diseases, Chair. Similarly, in relation to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, there's a very clear link between those wards in the city that have the coldest property and the emergency admissions to the hospital in relation to COPD. And then, Chair, members will be aware of the tragic news story in the national press this week of the little lad who lost his life living in damp and mouldy conditions. Normanton has the highest percentage of damp and mould within our city, Chair, and children in Normanton are 5 times the Derby average to be under the care of the paediatric respiratory team. The majority of the hazards and the health linkages are within the inner city wards, Chair, but some of them are more widely spread, and particularly trips and falls are spread more evenly around the city. And just for example, across the wards of Spondon and Chaddeston, we estimate that there are 100 residents living with a Category 1 hazard for a trip and fall who are over the age of 65, Chair, and obviously they're very vulnerable to trips and falls, and then that has significant impacts on their life and health chances thereafter, Chair. I would just draw members' attention to paragraph 4.5 in the Cabinet report. I won't go through all of that, but what that paragraph does, Chair, it lists all of the hazards, the key housing hazards. It gives our estimate of how many occurrences of those hazards are happening in the city. The cost, using a nationally recognised cost model, to put all of those hazards right, and then the annual saving, Chair, of if we were to put those right, what that saving would be to the NHS. And just looking at 2 examples, falling on level surfaces, the cost to put those 1,600 cases right would be over 1.2 million, but the annual saving to the NHS in Derby would be 1.1 million, and therefore that investment would pay back in just over a year. At the other end of the scale, putting right those cases of damp and mould or severe damp and mould in the city chair would cost £4.8 million. That's because that sort of work is quite intensive. It can often require structural work to a property, and the payback period for that sort of intervention would be over 13 years. The recommendations of the detailed report, Chair, are in 4.9, and the corresponding recommendations in your Cabinet report are in 2.1, 2.2. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that report. Martin, your group resolved to note the report last night?
Last night we were asked as executive secretary to deal with both items 12 and 13 together, and the recommendations do relate to both reports. Is it possible to deal with it in that way? Because I'd rather have a debate about that and then we'll come back to some of the things that are entwined. Is that possible?
If you don't mind, Martin, I'll deal with this item first, but you'll get absolutely every opportunity to refer back to item 12 once we've got that out of the way, because I know Councillor Webb's got some responses, well, comments, I think, probably on the... Did you want to speak?
I'll do it on both, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Shank.
Yeah, just briefly again, Chair. Are we confident we've got the necessary resources to deliver the recommendations in item 12 before we move on to item 13?
Ask either Councillor Webb or Ian to respond to that. I'm sure the answer is yes, but...
Yes, we've got the resources available to us. We are looking for further funding on these issues, and hopefully we'll be able to have all that we require to deal with what is a very shocking situation.
And an important situation to address. I mean, the level of interest in this particular item since papers were put out there has been high, and rightfully so, and I think just emphasises the need to try and tackle this type of issue. Right, I'll hold on the recommendations from 12 for now, and we'll look at 13 and do both together. So, Ian, did you want to introduce it? 13, because they are inextricably linked.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're quite right. And this item is also, in effect, a summary of a second report that your public health team has produced. We asked them to look at this report because we knew that the private rented sector in the city was increasing rapidly. It's increased from just under 17% in 2011 to almost 25% now. That compares with the national average of 20%. We found that the anecdotal evidence that we were receiving was that our housing in some parts of the city in particular were worse than the English Housing Survey were flagging, and on that basis, Chair, we bid for some government money which we received, and we undertook our own survey of the private rented stock within the city, Chair. We're one of just a very small number of councils who have done an on-the-ground survey of the private rented stock. Again, your report gives a number of examples of the conditions that we found. I'm not going to go through all of those, but just to pick up 2 or 3 of them, our survey is indicating that 10% of all Derby private rented properties has a significant issue in relation to damp and mould. The English Housing Survey was suggesting that figure was closer to 2%. our survey is suggesting within the central wards of the city, there are at least 900 category 1 electrical hazards. And again, the English Housing Survey was suggesting that figure was around about 130. So a significant discrepancy. Interestingly, I found that the survey was saying a third of our pre-1919 terrace properties, which are in the private rented sector, has a category 1 hazard for falls on the stairs. And members will be very familiar with our pre-1919 properties in Derby, with typically very steep and narrow stairways. And the last example I'll pull out, Chair, was that the survey is suggesting that 30% of our privately rented properties within the city would fail the Decent Home Standard. The Decent Home Standard, of course, is the standard that social housing has to achieve. And within our own stock, Chair, we do achieve 100% compliance with the Decent Home Standard. In terms of the recommendations, Chair, we think that part of the solution could be the introduction of either selective licensing or additional licensing. Selective licensing would require every private rented property within that selective licensing area to be licensed, and obviously therefore come up to fit housing standards. Additional licensing would require every HIMO within that additional licensing area, again, to be licensed. We think that could be part of the solution, Chair. It's very important that if members are minded to support that recommendation, that we go out and consult with landlords and tenants and other stakeholders, because it is potentially a draconian measure for landlords. It's important that we hear their views, Chair, and that Cabinet members could then consider that consultation before we take the final decision, Chair, on whether we were to proceed with either of those measures, Chair. Your other recommendations are listed 2.1 to 2.3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And before I open this out, can I just make a comment from myself in that it's absolutely right to recognise the problems we have in this sector, but it's also equally right to recognise that not all private landlords are rogue householders, if you like. Some of them are very diligent, got good properties, and do carry it out. They're not the problem. It's the rogue landlords that we need to address, and I think Roy will probably acknowledge there are organisations of landlords who are keen on social housing, come together and do what they can to help and assist us. So just have that on record so that we don't go blaming every private landlord in the city for the poor conditions that we've established are out there and need addressing. So Martin, you were asked to look at both papers together, and you come up with one recommendation in relation to that. I think Roy's seen that and will respond to that, but if you want to just introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. A number of months ago, I met up with the Head of Planning, Paul Clark, Head of Housing, Ian Fulliger, Head of Licensing. This was a number of months ago, raising concerns that we felt that we needed a comprehensive and immediate introduction of a registered landlord scheme. I understood that at the present time we now have 6 enforcement officers in the city compared to 66 in Nottingham. The way of raising those numbers, because there's sort of massive disparity, 10 to 1 compared to a neighbouring city, could be raised by charging landlords for that registered landlord scheme. It's only by getting that comprehensive scheme, we feel, that we will raise the standards and try and avoid the tragedy that we saw in Rochdale only a few days ago. We need to ensure that the standards of all people in rented accommodation and HIMOs in this city are improved. And also at the same time, alongside that, we do need to get Article 4 introduced to make sure that HIMOs of 6 people or less have to go to planning. Alongside that, we need a change in the local plan so we can pick and choose and work with local communities to make sure that those rented accommodations or HIMOs go into parts of the city that will fit in harmoniously with local communities, which they do not at the present time. I think the fear is that this is a little bit too slow and too late, and it's a real matter of urgency now, and it shouldn't be just one area as an experiment. We need to learn the lessons from other cities around this country and of what's happening in Rochdale to make sure there's no Rochdale ever occurs in this city. We need to improve the living standards of our constituents in rented accommodation, both in terms of internal and external, and make sure they fit within local communities. And I think we're keen to work with anybody to make sure that happens as rapidly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
In short, your recommendation is that Council consider a multi-agency action plan. Councillor Webber.
Yes, Chair. Where do I start? 4 years ago or thereabouts, when a desktop survey was done regarding housing conditions in the city, that was so disturbing that it resulted in a full survey being done that you are seeing the results of this evening. That's good work from all the teams, be that strategic housing, public health. We've got our healthy housing hub and our DASH service, the decent and safe service, that works with the majority of landlords, as you've pointed out, Chair, across the city to maintain decent and safe homes in the private rented sector. And it offers those landlords support and guidance and regular updates on new legislation that affects the private rented sector. But this report here is about those landlords that aren't willing to work as well as the majority of landlords across the city. We're trying to bring about the decent homes standard that Derby Homes reached nearly 20 years ago now. And that's our social housing in the city. So we are lagging behind. The report itself makes the link with health and the impacts of poor housing on health and the cost to the health service of this. And we have got health partners on board with this. With licensing, as Ian Fulliger pointed out, we have got to go out to consultation. And much as I would like to see licensing introduced as soon as possible, we must go through due process, because what we don't want to see at the end of the day is a legal challenge if we do not introduce a licensing system in the correct and proper manner. So that's why that recommendation is here, to go out to consultation. And we're not here to persecute or prosecute landlords. What we are asking for is them to come and work with us. We've managed over the years that I've been around here as cabinet member over 7 million in grants towards improving housing conditions in the city. And those include the private sector and the private rented sector. So if they're willing to work with us, then we will improve the situation across the city. And collectively, we are doing that. So we have health, we have public health, we have social care, we have the landlords working with us wherever possible. And we will hopefully deliver the improvement that's required. So I can accept the recommendations from scrutiny with the proviso that we ensure that licensing system is properly constituted so we can avoid some landlords not participating in it through a legal challenge.
Thank you. Consultation then is the key. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Kerr.
I just wanted to be optimistic that we can change things. In item 12, there's a table which Ian Pulligo drew our attention to, and within that we can see that fire risk has a 10-year payback now. Well, if we'd gone back 15, 20, 25 years, there were far more fires taking place in domestic properties than there are now. And that has changed because of a significant amount of work going in proactively to make a difference. If we are able to do significant proactive work, we can make a difference in other areas too. So optimism, I think, is what we need, a step change, which is what licensing can deliver, and hopefully we will be soon seeing the benefits of it.
And I'm sure another one of our partners, the fire service, will continue to make those efforts in those areas. And then any other comments, questions? In that case, I will refer to item 12. We have recommendations 2.1 and 2.2. Can they be agreed? And in item 13, it's recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. Are those agreed? Thank you. Moving on then to item 14, an update into the National Bus Strategy. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So the National Bus Strategy was published in March last year, and that set out a clear requirement for local areas to formally establish and constitute enhanced bus partnerships. And this is the route the government are taking to release funding for improved bus services in local areas. And Cabinet approved our notification to the Department of Transport of our intention to establish our own partnership in June of last year. It's important to be really clear that without an enhanced partnership, we would be unlikely to attract further government funding, and that's ourselves and or our bus operators, and it also impacts on how we are seen by the Department of Transport to get other funding for transport initiatives. So it's really important that we comply with that requirement. So we have been working since June last year through the guidance and details as they've emerged to enable us to submit our bus service improvement plan, and that was approved October last year. And now both the bus service improvement plan and the enhanced partnership scheme have been through public consultation, where it was very positively received. And a degree of majority of that sort of response was very much in support of things like the proposed target measures to improve journey times, reliability, punctuality of services, to grow passenger numbers and to improve satisfaction from customers. We recently had confirmation from the Department of Transport that our enhanced partnership scheme has passed all their requirements. That's great, but only once we've had it formally constituted will we actually gain access to the £7,025,000 of indicative funding that we've been allocated by the Department of Transport. So really important this report passed tonight, we'll get access to that money. We act as local authority as the accountable body for that funding, and the oversight and delivery of the bus service improvement plan is held by the enhanced partnership, and the governance of the partnership is through a board and a forum, obviously involving bus operators, etc. And the board will be responsible for future content and arrangements for the variation of the funding. And it will be a place for discussing different areas of issues that affect our bus network overall, consulting with, building consensus among the various stakeholders and making recommendations. It's got quite a large part to play in trying to improve the coordination and capacity of our bus network in the city. The members on it have equal voting rights and can determine spend in line with the national strategy. So the council holds a veto, which it can obviously exercise if it believes it needs to, but it is very much about how we are creating a partnership across the stakeholders around the bus service in the city. So really the report is largely about asking members to confirm the establishment of that enhanced partnership, and then that allows us to access that funding and to get on with that work. The report also seeks some acceptance from Cabinet of a very small amount of local transport fund, again from the Department of Transport. We've been allocated £25,000, which is a very small amount of money in sort of transport scale. And we propose to use this to support 2 trials. And those 2 trials would be in line with the national strategy and would test the small bus to big bus integration. So small buses that can get you around a local community and then link you into the bigger bus network. That's the intention. There's very strict criteria around how we can use that money, and Department of Transport is very clear about that, and it is a very small amount, and therefore we wanted to use it quite pragmatically, and we're proposing 2 trial routes for that. So one in the Darley Abbey and Allistry area, so linking those communities into Park Farm, and the second trial in Spondon to link the edge of this village to the centre of the village. So it's really important to be clear that these are not links into the city centre. They're not able to be used, the fund isn't able to be used in that way. The funding is quite clearly, as I said, strictly controlled what it can be used for. It cannot be used to replace schemes that have failed in the private sector. So it's really clear. We are exploring those 2 trials with Derbyshire Community Transport, and officers think it's the best use of what is quite modest funding, and it will provide good information and evidence for future funding bids, and that's really the important point around these, because they will give us a sense of how, if we added services to the network, how they would be received potentially at a local level. So that the 2 trials will be reviewed and by the enhanced partnership, and that will help the robust decision making of that partnership in future. Also worth mentioning for Cabinet that, of course, there are further implications in the establishment of the East Midlands County Combined Authority, which will in time become the local transport authority for the area, and we would expect the enhanced partnership and the BSIP improvement plan to be made in the combined authority space in that sort of regional footprint. The combined authority, of course, unlocks significant additional transport funding into the region, and also gives us completely new powers, things like the franchising power we don't hold at the moment. So there's major benefits for us, obviously, around that. But the work we're doing here will obviously feed into that. So really the report is to ask members to approve the enhanced partnership plan so we can unlock some of that funding, and for those 2 trials, both in Darley, Allistry and in Spondon.
Thank you very much. So the report addresses a progress report. There has been some progress, and this is the recommendation asking for establishment of that partnership is part of that progress, but it's a complicated area. It's an area in which there is no quick solution to, but it's an area in which will be part and parcel of the potential effect of the combined authority, as you say. In the meantime, we've taken the opportunity of a small amount of funding to run a couple of pilots to areas, not to connect them, not to replace the failed commercial bus operations, but to link communities to their district centres and to ongoing transport, public transport, because certainly in Spondon, and I know in Darley also, the public have made it perfectly clear that they feel disconnected from their communities to the rest of the area, and we're taking the opportunity to trial a solution thanks to the cooperation of Derbyshire Community Transport. I'm sure these measures will be welcomed in both areas, but I caution that it is a pilot. It's a trial. We need to see how it works, and actually we need to make use of the public in those communities need to make use of it to make it viable going forward. So I welcome it with a slight note of caution, but certainly something we've been asked repeatedly to try and address, and the emergence of a small amount of funding dedicated to exactly that type of scheme gives us that opportunity. As has been pointed out, there is a significant difference between trying to address failed routes or areas where there is public transport coverage, but maybe not enough. And so these are the only two areas in the city that we feel are applicable to this funding that's tightly dictated. So with that, I welcome that. Councillor Repton, your committee resolved to note the report.
Yeah, and also welcome the report as well, as far as these two trials are concerned. At exec scrutiny yesterday, the point was made, there are issues in Mackworth as well, which I know that the,
Martin,
the members from Mackworth and Nigel will talk about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. I was asking you for the exec committee's views, not your own, but there you go. But I am going to ask for any other comments, thoughts on the subject. Roy.
Just one comment, Chair. Will these buses in the trial be disability accessible?
Community transport.
They are community transport buses, Roy, but I'm not sure all the vehicles to be used will have lifts, but Yvonne's putting her hand up as though she might know a bit more.
Yes, Chair, when we were meeting with community transport, it was exactly the question we asked, because a lot of our residents do have disabilities or are elderly and find getting onto the vehicles quite difficult. And they have got vehicles that have got the down lift at the back, so that was assured to us that they would be accessible for disabilities and for those that might find getting on and off vehicles quite difficult.
And I guess as a pilot, then the need and the availability of the necessary transport is going to be part and parcel of that pilot to be able to guide us with a way forward. Good. I think technically under your portfolio, Jerry, anything you wish to add?
It is, Chair, yeah. Just reinforce what Rachel said and what you've said as well. I think these areas, they've got to be used, these pilot schemes. They've got to be used, or obviously they'll be taken away again. So it's the ones that have been shouting out for these that the national transport has been, or the higher transport has been taken away from them. So please use them. Let's use these pilots to really reinforce that the residents around those areas, they need to get into those shopping areas. And I fully endorse this. I think it's a great idea with the pilots. And just on the local transport, the enhanced partnership. I've been chair of the committee for the last 14 months. We've had great meetings with Arriva, Trent Barton and the other bus operators in the area. There's been some give and take from both sides. It's been a struggle to get this enhanced partnership all together, but it's now written now, and obviously this is the full endorsement so we can get the money. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Well, good news story in effect. Any other comments, questions? In that case, recommendations 2.1 to 2.5, can they be agreed? Thank you. Item 15 then, community managed libraries. Rachel?
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's a relatively simple report. I know Cabinet has previously discussed the importance of community libraries and the role that they play as sort of community spaces in our localities. Just to reinforce, these community managed libraries are over and above the 5 statutory libraries that the Council runs directly. Cabinet received a report back in July this year instituting a review of the CML model, given issues around COVID and other issues that have really impacted on the ability of that model to be fully tested properly. This review is underway and has already assessed a level of information and detailed unit costs and information about the level of visits and usage around particular libraries. So we're ongoing with that information. Some really rich data coming out of that. And we are looking at that alongside the work the Council is doing, looking at all its assets in localities and recognising the asset-based approach we have to building local resilience. So the information to date does show significant differences in usage and value for money in different arrangements in some of the CMLs, and we're trying to do that, mapping that consistently. Really, the report is to say that to allow us to conclude that review, we require a bit more time to do that. that work isn't completely completed, and we want to bring full consideration back for members from that review properly. And this report is therefore asking for additional funding for direct help and advice to continue running the CMLs in their current structure and arrangements until the end of March, to allow us to finalise that review and bring back those conclusions to Cabinet for consideration. And that is at £104,000 to enable those to continue to the end of March. And then it will obviously be brought back to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Yes, thank you. That is the extent of the report, is to establish the funding needed to be able to take us till the end of March, whilst any future decisions on the future are discussed and mentioned. Martin,
Yeah, I think just to emphasise what the recommendation, Chair, there obviously is an anxiety from those that run the libraries and those that use the libraries, and it's trying to get the intentions out there to the public well before March, if at all possible.
Absolutely, Martin. Doubt and uncertainty is not good for anybody in any organisation. We acknowledge that, but there needs to be careful consideration on this, because there are a number of factors, not least NHL, DHL ability and a desire to continue. Councillor Shanklin.
Thank you, Chair. Yourself and Councillor Repton have mentioned doubt and uncertainty. If you refer back to the report in July that Rachel has mentioned, a considerable amount of money was sanctioned then, and the recommendations approved by this Cabinet was to bring that report back for the end of November. What I've not seen in this report is, why this delay, because this delay has cost Derby's taxpayers another £105,000. So I think it's okay to say it's a really simple report, and it's very simple as in it needs a bit more money to go for another couple of months. But if a commitment was made in July to have this review done by the end of November, I just don't think it's acceptable just to rock up in November and say we need another £105,000 cash from a hard-strapped local authority to say we need another couple of months. What's going to stop us in January to say we've still not got a decision and we need another few months? It's a lot of money being spent on doing, well, not just doing the review, but allowing DHA to continue operating the libraries. If we've committed to do a piece of work in a certain period of time, I think we should hold ourselves to be able to complete that work.
Interim complicating factors have meant that we need more time. Councillor Eyre, you want to come in on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We can accept the recommendation. It's definitely our intention to inform the public, the volunteers, and everyone involved with libraries as soon as we can about any decisions we'll make in the coming months. I know there was a bit of discussion at Executive Scrutiny last night. There was the accusation that this was kicking the decision into the long grass. It isn't. It's about keeping the libraries open until the 31st of March, so that over the winter period we can analyse the outcomes of the review and what they mean. Councillor Shanker, to take on your points there about the additional cost, if you look at the difference in the revenue pressure in terms of the City Council managing the libraries compared to DHA managing the libraries, that might explain a little bit of it in terms of the financial pressure that's there. We also managed to reopen some of the discussions with DHA, and I have to pay huge thanks to Charlie and Community Safety for that and the work he's done on that relationship, which has led us to where we are now. And of course to thank Community Action Derby for their work undertaking the review as well. If we have a look at some of the aspects of the review in the report in front of us, some of it makes good reading, some of it doesn't, some of it strong, some of it not. It's positive that we have a library that will cost DHA £5.33 per visit. It's much less positive that there's another one at £149.49 per visit. And we as a local authority have got to ask those questions, the difficult questions around what that means. We can't shy away from that, and as a Cabinet we won't shy away from that. We don't want to drag this out any longer than necessary, and I do remain hopeful. We said at the start that we didn't commence this review with the intention of closing libraries, and we absolutely meant that. But given the financial pressures that we're seeing in Derby, in the UK, and indeed the world, it would be unreasonable to try and discount that factor. If we talk about making a definitive decision today, if that was what we wanted to do, the only definitive decision we could make today is to close them from the 1st of December. I don't think that's the right decision. As Cabinet, we don't think that's the right decision either. So we'll continue the report, we'll consider the report, we'll analyse what we found, we'll have the necessary discussions and announce at the right time. We're not kicking this into the long grass, and we will inform people as soon as we can. But for now, the right decision is to keep the libraries open over the winter period and approve this recommendation. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. And all that emphasises is it's a significant decision as part of a significant process that's ongoing. Any other comments? Thoughts? No? In that case, we have recommendation 2.1. Can that be agreed? Thank you. So it's 2.1 and 2.2, isn't it? 2.1 and 2.2. Good. Item 16 then is implementation of a bin sense technology.
So that's me, please, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry.
So this report is to approve the implementation of sense technology into litter bins on streets, parks and open spaces. And technology is used within the industry to maximise efficiency that's outlined in section 3.2 of the report. And what the technology is essentially is it's a sensor that's installed into each of our litter bins, and that monitors the fill level of the bins, and it provides an alert when the bin needs emptying. So we've trialled this technology in 200 streets bins and most recently 30 parks bins. And the bins prior to the trial were the main kind of workload of the enhanced bin emptying round. So they really were on a list, and we'd work from bin 1 to bin 2 to bin 3 and go all the way to the bottom and then restart again. But the problem with working like that was until we got to each of the bins, we didn't know whether they were actually full or whether they were only half full or overflowing. And putting the sensors in really has moved us away from that, and we now only empty them bins as and when they need emptying. And we've seen a couple of different things with that. So there's some of the bins that have got sensors in now that we empty more frequently than we used to do. So that suggests to us that really them bins spent a lot of their time full and overflowing. And on the flip side of that, there's a proportion of the bins that we're trialling that we now empty less frequently than we used to before. So that suggests to us that actually that was an unnecessary trip. We were getting there too early without the sensor installed. And cutting out them unnecessary trips has decreased our visits to bins by 53%. So what we're proposing to do is to expand this technology, and that will cover all of the grounds bins, so on your green kind of round bins on your parks and open spaces, and then a proportion of the streets bins. So when we're thinking the streets bins, we're thinking of the known high usage bins, and also in the outlying areas, any that are on a routine cleanse of monthly and 6 weekly. So not your kind of frequent area cleansing, the ones that go a bit more than that. 6.1 of the report provides a cost breakdown for us, and that is between £76,000 and £80,000 a year. And we've identified that budget within existing street pride budgets. And 7.1 and 8.1 give some positive climate and legal implications to recommending this approval. So the technology will reduce our risk of breaching the Environmental Protection Act by making sure we've got capacity in bins out on the streets. And thinking of the climate implications, so not only emptying the bins as and when they needed, there's route optimisation available there. So not just going from the best way from bin A to bin B, but if there's 50 bins that go through on the device in a day, it will route that round and put it in the right order for the team to get round in the best way possible. A couple of other implications to consider within this report. So this is, for us, this expansion is new. We've not done this before. So it's perhaps that consideration that until we roll sensors out in these numbers, we really don't know what that demand will be. And then also, if this wasn't approved, to consider that we would have to remove the sensors that we're currently trialling, so that 230, which will take them bins back to having an increased level of complaints and pushing us back towards a more scheduled way of working. Lee, can I just bring you in to touch on anything, grounds, or add?
Yeah,
to
thanks,
that?
Sam. Thank you, Chair. So to touch on Sam's points there, so the bin sense trial was expanded to include the bins that were on the parks and now near 400 parks and open spaces, those bins. And this is working towards the overall goal of increasing bin capacity within parks overall. So we recently completed a study that looked at bin condition across these parks and open spaces. And by and large, the condition of these bins is very good. There's about 609 of them. And to replace all of these bins with a larger receptacle would come in at something like £250,000, so quite expensive. And even if we could afford to do that, we'd still end up with a collection regime that would be less than it could be with an intelligence-led solution like this. So by having the sensor technology, we've seen similar benefits to the street bins, and we'd achieve almost like a double buff. So increased capacity because of better collection cycles. We're not travelling to bins that don't need emptying or only half full. We're collecting just the ones that are full. And once the bins come towards the end of their life, we can replace them or look to replacing them with a larger receptacle. So we get a double buff there. And it also frees up officer time so they can go on to do other things like litter picking sites and collection of fly tip waste, things like that. Thank you.
Super. I mean, a 53% reduction in the number of trips can't be ignored and sniffed at, excuse the pun, with the bins. But your analysis of the pilot that suggests to you that some bins were full to overflowing for some period is absolutely right. You'd actually do that without the analysis. I can example you several in my ward where it's just the popularity of the bin, the position of the bin, that meant that these bins were overflowing, and any advantageous technology that helps us to reduce that is, in my view, can only be great. I see Councillor Repton's left, but the Executive Committee looked at this last night and actually gave a ringing endorsement of the policy going forward. Good. Jerry, your portfolio, anything to add?
Ringing endorsement from me as well, Chair. Thank you to the team putting this report together. Fantastic bit of technology. I hope the Derby Telegraph reports some nice figures from the Cabinet report rather than last night's report that they put on. This helps efficiency. This will help costs. This will help the city. There's going to be no overflowing bins, hopefully. I'll put that hopefully as a statement. But yeah, I don't want it to come back and bite me. But yeah, great bit of technology. Fantastic use of resources as well. So yeah, it's great. So well done to the team as well. So thank you. Thank you.
There is a part of this report in the confidential items at the end, just around the commercial sensitivity of the contract, I think. Councillor Shanker.
Thanks, Chair. Just two brief points. Welcome the technology and the process we're using to try and be more efficient. Really good. I like the report. I did say when I was briefed on this, I'd come back to officers with questions. But having then read the report in detail, there were no further questions because it's a really well written and detailed report. The only one question I did think of more recently was, and I might be wrong in my assumption here, but I was thinking once we've got a picture of these bins over a period of time, I'm rightly or wrongly assuming those that need more frequent emptying will remain those that need more frequent emptying, and those that don't need the visits as much would also remain in that position. But do we then continue to pay the cost for hiring these sensors forever and a day, or is there some sort of reduction at a further time once we know what the trends look like?
On the first point, I would hope, and I'm sure, and I think I'm reassured that it's part of a process of improvement. It might, for example, indicate where we need larger bins to reduce the frequency of opening and this, that, and the other. In terms of the contract, I think it's a 4-year contract for which we pay a higher charge, a lease charge, on the equipment as it goes along. But in terms of cost efficiency and savings, I think it will be greatly beneficial. Anybody team want to come back on that?
Probably just one point to add from us. So in addition to, we can look at whether there's them trends. We have seen a bit of a blend. So there's been some of the bins as part of the trial that some weeks we're emptying very differently than the next week. It's not really that stable, and that could depend on a few different things. One interesting thing that we've got with the technology is it's that decision-making ability and that intelligence-led kind of decisions behind it. So what we can do with this, with the sensors, is install it into a temporary bin. And if we've got a hot spot or somewhere that we think may need an increased provision of bins, we can put that temporary bin out and move that about and monitor the fill level to make sure that we've got, you know, exactly the right spot really before we put a permanent bin in situ.
Okay. Councillor Graves, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether I've been getting a different experience, but I get 6 complaints at least a week about full bins, and I've been having that for quite a long period of time. I don't know whether it's when they were testing it or what, but I just wonder whether it's as good as it's said, because I was informed that some of these bins that were full and not being collected did have these sensors in, and they were full for very quickly and for a long time, and people then start complaining to me about it. And I've had numerous, and far too many I can count, advising the refuse collectors that they need to empty these bins. So I'm just wondering whether this is the right technology, and whether you need to trial it even further, because my experience and the residents that have contacted me has not been a particularly good one.
I'd suggest we'll soon find out, and this is exactly that part of the process to try and redress some of those issues. Councillor Eyre, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I've had exactly the opposite experience. I've had some fantastic conversations with Sam Simon and the team around the sensors for the bins, especially when we've been looking at a couple of potential temporary bins. I had a few bins that I used to receive regular emails about. We had a discussion about these sensors about a year ago. I've not heard anything about any of those bins in the time since. I'm certainly hoping they've got sensors in, or I'm just not getting the emails through. But as far as I'm concerned, we had the discussions around them, and I've heard nothing about those since. It seems to be another fantastic bit of kit. So yeah, another ringing endorsement from me.
Any other comments, thoughts? No. Thank you. Moving on then to item 17. That made you sneeze, Councillor. Q2 financial monitoring. Simon. Let me just say at the outset here, this is just to point out to members, this is a paper and an item for Cabinet around the 2023 Q2 financial monitoring. It's not a report to enable any detailed discussion on this year's budget or budget proposals or other potential savings. This is an update on the current position leading towards the budget position. I just thought I'd make that clear from the start. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's the right context that you've just set it in. In Q1, we highlighted the significant change that the country, businesses, public sector was facing in macroeconomic conditions, and that ranges for us from the amount of inflation, supply chain, borrowing rates, and all the other factors that make up a very complex financial picture for the council. And one of the early areas that we highlighted was the impact of inflation. And if you heard the news today, inflation was 11.1%, but that hides some of the costs that we see in individual inflation lines, such as energy, which went up by more than 50%, such as construction costs that have gone up for some projects between 10 and 30%, and shortages of supply and labour. So we are not in isolation to what is being experienced by the council. And before the Russian invasion in February, which is when we set our budgets, obviously there were certain assumptions around where inflation could be and where inflation and borrowing rates would go. Obviously those forecasts by both national commentators fell short of the reality we're facing. But just to summarise then, the report does highlight that our projected overspend has gone up by just over £2 million between Q1 and Q2. We are seeing, as we said, the impact of inflation. We are seeing an increase in demand for services across the city linked to cost of living and many different factors. So that increase is relatively small when we look at what is happening across the local government world. But it's still an increase that places increased pressure on our financial sustainability and our financial resilience. The report details a series of areas where there have been positive trends as well, such as securing additional health contributions to childcare placements, reducing the net overspend, and improvements in our home school transport position as a result of ongoing contract negotiations, improved debt collection and adult social care, success in managing or containing demand when need is being presented within the city. And just to maybe give you the context, this is not new, the pressure that we're facing in terms of public sector finances. We've seen this in terms of the balance between funding and demand over a number of years. And we have introduced spending review panels, which obviously look at both our spending, vacancy and placement budgets. And again, they've had a real impact in helping us to contain any potential larger overspend, and I think we should acknowledge that. We've also got the good building blocks of financial management, and we took an assessment of our financial management code to the audit committee recently, which said we've got good building blocks. And maybe to give you some assurance that in the previous 2 financial years, through managing in-year demands, we were able to put 2.2 million into reserves last year and 5.3 million into reserves. This is the General Fund Reserve and Budget Risk Reserve in the previous year. We are, as a result of this overspend, going to tighten our controls and those financial building blocks even further to try and bring down that overspend. But it is likely that we will have a residual overspend in this financial year that will be drawn down against the Budget Risk Reserve. And that obviously means that the usable reserves that we have for future financial resilience and financial sustainability will be less than we started the year with. Again, I think all councils, I think it was 90% of councils indicate that they are in the same position where they are not confident of delivering a balanced spend position at the end of this financial year. Just to go on the other areas of the report that we have in front of us, it gives an update on the capital programme, with the majority of projects and programmes delivering in line with the profile, but there has been an opportunity to reprofile some of the transforming city work following our joint discussions with Nottingham City Council and the DFT in respect of a profiling of those schemes, and that is the major variance that you see here. In respect of the dedicated schools grants, we continue to see an increase in education healthcare plans for children with special educational needs, which is causing an overspend in the high needs block, and by implication, an increase in and school transport costs as well. So that's detailed in the report. And finally, the collection fund, which is effectively our role in collecting council tax and business rates. As of the middle of the year, that was ahead of the previous year's profile, despite the tough economic conditions we're facing. But we are keeping a close eye on that because as people incur more household expenditure pressures, we need to make sure that we are not the debt that is not paid, because if that happens, that has a residual impact on obviously our forecasting for future years. So my voice has got a bit of a croak, so I'll probably stop there and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to you and your officers for a very detailed report and update on the slightly worrying financial position and highlighting the differences between this year and previous years. The Executive Scrutiny Board looked at this last night and resolved just to note the report. Do we have any questions or comments on the report? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, it's something which has already been highlighted in the challenge we've got ahead of us, which is the energy costs. And I don't think we can have any hope that in the short term that they are likely to be reducing. And in the same way as a household needs to look at how to save loss of energy, improve their insulation, we need to look, I think, at how we can improve that situation and potentially invest to save. Now, we've cut quite a lot from the capital programme here, and I just wonder whether there is any opportunity to look between now and the end of this financial year at taking any action to reduce future energy costs by looking at insulation of some of our buildings. This one's been done very well. I think hopefully its performance is continuing to run as planned. But there are a number of other older buildings that we're still using where it could be that we could do some work now to save for the future. And part of that is also to look and making sure that our renewable energy assets are also working to the maximum, both the turbine on the river and the PVs on the roof here and elsewhere. They do need cleaning sometimes, so if no one's been up and scraped the muck off them, then that might be something that would actually do a little bit now, and something that we could be looking at doing with very negligible cost. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All I can say is our capital programme is under constant review, as are our assets and our estates at the moment in particular, around asset disposal and maintenance costs and things as such. The one thing I pick out of what you said is the reference to the comparison between the councils and the general member of public's financial pressures at the moment, because they're comparable. You know, we have salary issues, we have power issues, we have a variety of things that apply to your own household budgeting. You can apply across the council, and that's a good part of the reason for the concerns that we are voicing at the moment. So yes, we will. Yes, Simon, you want to come back on some of that?
Yes, maybe just to give a bit of background. Over the years, supported by you indeed, investing in LED street lights, if you look at these expenditure and on that's been a saving that is reaping benefits. We also have in the capital programme access to SALEX funding, which is all about energy reduction. And you'll see, I think that has gone up in this year and that, but we do constantly look at opportunities. If there's a return on investment that could be made through some energy improvemms, we will look at that, because with the volatility in the market, the more we can reduce our energy use, the better. So as the leader has said, we have a programme and we're constantly reviewing it. Thank you.
Councillor Schenker.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try focusing on the report, for Q2 monitoring report, but I think trying to phrase it just in the context of that is completely wrong and might even explain why we are in such a bad financial position. So I will not talk about next year's budget and savings needed to achieve that, and we'll save that to a later date. What I will talk about, though, is the process in setting this budget, because if I look at what I said in February at the budget setting meeting, I questioned whether enough provision had been made for demand in CYP, and the estimates used were accurate, and that's obviously proven now they weren't accurate. I also questioned whether assumptions around energy costs were accurate, and they've proven to be wrong. And finally, I questioned assumptions around energy costs, and they, again, have been proven wrong. So
Sorry,
it wasn't...
I don't wish to intervene here, but I have to point out that in February, nobody knew what the pressures were going to be in terms of power and electricity and things. And none of that could have been predicted by anybody.
I think the point I'm making, Chair, and hopefully you'll appreciate that, is they could have been predicted a lot better and a lot more accurately than what's transpired. And I think that's pretty obvious. And if you cared to read up on this, I think that's easily doable. I think also what we need to look at is this time last financial year, the Q2 monitoring report, the predicted overspend declared in Q1 last year to Q2, it was coming down from 11.6 million to 8.1 million. This year, it's really worrying that the predicted the overspend predicted is actually going up. And if we continue in that way, I know our Section 151 officer said the obvious, that reserves will be less than they were at the start of the year. I think on this prediction, the business risk reserve will be zero or very close to zero. So this isn't about a few million here or there. This is potentially wiping out the council's reserves. So I think continuing to do the things the way we've done them, having the panels and the reviews and stopping a bit of recruitment, slicing a bit of here, slicing a bit of there, isn't going to work. I noted after the Q1 monitoring report, I think it was a day before the report came out, you told us and residents in Derby, you'd written to government about the position of the council's finances. I was just wondering if you've had a response to that letter that you wrote a day before the report came out last time. Also, what I don't see in this report, and point me in the right direction if I've missed it, is do we think realistically we can balance the budget for this financial year, which gives us a slightly better position going into future years?
Thanks. I'm not sure we know which minister we were writing to at the time or which one. I think we've written to virtually all of them, and the responses of, because of events and because of the way things have changed, their responses will probably be out of date and not relevant at this moment in time. But I appreciate you sticking to the subject of the report. There will be plenty of opportunity to explain to you that we're doing far more than the things you're talking about in terms of putting our job here and this, that and the other. It's a much deeper look at the finances of the council that's ongoing, and that will be conveyed in reports and consultation in the near future. Yvonne, did you want to come back on that, Simon, at all? Or? Yeah.
Yes, if I can just maybe pick up a couple of areas. As a council, we procure our energy costs collectively through a framework contract, and that actually, by being part of that and securing energy prices going forward, we have missed the peak of the wholesale increases that other people have seen, especially private businesses in the city, which is really quite significant. So again, it's about looking at how we spread our buying power and everything else. But no one could have forecast the energy costs in February.
And I guess it assimilates with domestic situations where householders have been in a fixed contract and escaped a lot of the effect of these increases. We're in that same position. Yeah?
And the question is, can we balance our budget? So I introduced the report by saying the national and local context of public finances and the spend profile is not normal. Every council is responding to it in the most professional way and the best way for the city or their locality that they can. I explained that we are tightening some of our spending controls to try and turn the increased overspend back down again. And I'd hope, but I cannot guarantee in this current economic climate, that we will have a lower overspend at the end of the financial year. But I did indicate I don't think this financial year we will be able to get it down to zero or a surplus as we did in the previous 2 years in contributing to reserves. But that's what I'm paid to try and lead us through that unknown picture of economic conditions. Every day is different, every hour is different, and we are responding at pace with the Cabinet to come up with solutions. Thank you.
Exactly my point I was going to make is that every day, the circumstances that change and affect the overall picture, but it's right to be realistic about the potential for the outcome in this year. And tomorrow is going to be no exception to that. We actually don't know the position in relation to the potential budgets until after tomorrow, and as we assess the outcome of tomorrow and eventually the local government settlement, which won't come until later in December. So it's challenging, shall we say. Councillor Williams, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to talk a little bit then about children's social care, because I think Councillor Shanker's comments are quite unfair in what he says about us getting the predictions wrong, because actually what we based the predictions on then was about the number of looked after children in care. And we worked extremely hard to make sure that those numbers came down, and they have come down, which I'm sure you will agree, and I'm sure you will accept the work that has gone on there to make sure that the number of looked after children coming into care has reduced safely, might I add. We've also had a look at what are our in-house provision for foster carers, because the balance used to be that we had to send more of our looked after children to external independent foster caring agencies. We've now, again, worked extremely hard to do that, and that was what we were basing our figures on, that's what we were looking at, and that's how we were working to achieve that. We have changed that, and we've turned the tide on that in terms of the numbers and the percentages of our own in-house foster carers, who we all know, and I'm sure you all agree, with the statistics and with the facts and with the supporting evidence that having our own in-house foster carers is a much better outcome for our children and young people. It's not just about the finance, it's about their outcomes, their life chances and living their best life. And our in-house foster carers are fantastic. And we have worked extremely hard to make sure that we do that. And that's not, as I say, just about the cost. What has happened, and that we could not have predicted because nobody could have predicted it, is the complexity in nature of the children that we've had to take into care over this last period. And we've had to deal with some real complex issues that we've not had to deal with before, that have had multiple complexities, and that either our in-house carers, our in-house homes, and indeed the local provision here has not been able to provide for safely and securely. So we have had to use expensive placements that are outside of this area. And again, we're looking at different ways and we can move that forward in terms of working with our partners in D2N2, in terms of making sure that efficiency in the market is as good as we can possibly make it. We put in all those spending controls that have already been spoken about by Ms. Riley. We've done so much work there. What I would do is I would ask those people that say they had this, ball that they could predict the future in, is actually come and join us. Use your magic ball to help influence those in power. Come and join us asking for things like caps on independent fostering agency fees, caps on secure accommodation fees. Come and help us to join in the call to make sure that we do have enough funding in children's social care. Because I've been writing my socks off and my fingers are numb from the amount of letters that I've written to ask for all of these things to happen. And I would love you to join us so we speak collectively as a voice, because actually having a go at each other over the political spectrum is an absolute waste of time. It doesn't gain anything. It doesn't help the children in anything. So come and join me. Write us a joint letter. Come and knock on Downing Street door with me. Come and do all those things that we've been doing. I absolutely welcome you all with open arms to do that, because together is the only way they're going to make the changes that are needed in children's social care. So we will continue to try and make those improvements. We will continue to have a look at the spending controls, and we will continue to make sure that our children and young people in the city live their best lives. Thank you much, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Smell, you want to sum up, or?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I couldn't have, proceeded on something such strong and passionate from Councillor Williams there, because we are doing everything in the background to local ministers, chancellors, to prime ministers as well. But we're also lobbying the LGA, other East Midlands councils. I know yourself and the deputy have been working tirelessly in the background, connecting with other councils, because the situation that we're in is not so unique. This is beyond the politics, as Councillor Williams has said. It's not blue, red, yellow, purple, whatever. We are here together to represent Derby, and we need to put all our differences aside, especially when it comes to the budget setting. And I will hold hands up that Councillor Shanker has engaged with me previously, and obviously I know that he will certainly engage with me again moving forward. But we are doing everything we can, and I know the figures out here don't make for pleasant reading, and it's not as a cabinet member for finance that I would like to see come forward. But I have to give some credit and praise to our finance departments, but also not just our finance teams, but also our teams across the whole spectrum of the council, because everyone is having to monitor their budgets. Everyone's having to make sure that we try and bring this down, because historically we've managed to contain some of our pressures in Q2, but this time we've been unsuccessful in doing that. However, the rise hasn't been as significant as we first envisaged in Q1. So hopefully we can come with a more positive outcome in Q3 and Q4 to help to bring these pressures down. But we will continue to be fighting with partners, yourself, anyone in this chamber who wants to help lobby government, because we've done everything that's been requested of us for the last 2 years by central government. We was the vehicle, we was the arm in keeping services going, emptying bins, making sure that our vulnerable were being looked after with medication, food. We helped deliver all the grants, all the funding. We was that vehicle, we was that arm. So now we're calling upon central government to come and support us, and not just us, but every single local authority in the UK needs help support now. Whilst our pressures are probably much smaller compared to others, other local governments, I think Glasgow, Glasgow reported close to £120 million in pressures, which is an astronomical amount. And you would have seen a letter that's just come out recently from Kent County Council and Hampshire County Council. So we're not unique. The government are going to have to step in and come to a point where they're going to have to financially help us and do everything that's required for us, because we've done everything that's been asked for. But I can guarantee you, as a collective cabinet, we are continuing to have those conversations. We are prepared to have conversations with 10 Downing Street, and I support what Councillor Williams says. Let's go to 10 Downing Street, let's knock on that door. Thank you.
Have to get past the police at the entrance first, but yes, we'll do it in different ways. Thanks for your contributions there. And as you say, Councillor Shanker has started to engage in the process, and I've agreed to take it the next stage further with him tomorrow. So if we can get agreement to a joint approach on this, then all the better, because yeah, that's the way forward. And unless there's any other urgent contributions, I'm going to put recommendation 2.1 points A to G in this update to the Cabinet. Can they be agreed? Yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on then to item 18, that's compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. This is our standard report, compliance with contract and financial procedure rules, and it consists of a report and an addendum. So there's two items that we're asking for consideration tonight. One is to seek permission to start a procurement exercise to introduce a chatbot solution to both Derby City Council and Derby Homes websites and our contact centre telephony. Many of us will be experiencing that with the development of artificial intelligence and everything else, we can often deal with people's issues 24/7 through the use of that. And I think chatbots, as you go onto your bank, gas company, etc., is something that is getting a lot more prevalence and is easy to use and resolves people's issues at that point of contact. That isn't to say that people cannot speak to a person at the end. Let's make that absolutely clear. But it's to try and manage that transaction as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So the report details requests to approve that procurement to start. And the addendum talks about a submission of a bid for up to 600,000 for supported housing improvement funding for unregulated use of supporting exempt accommodation. And I think, like the report that Ian Fullinger brought earlier, it's an area that in the city we want to improve. It's improving the standards of housing and the support through bolstering enforcement, which is important here, and the quality of support and housing provision. And ultimately, talking about the outcome, is to ensure vulnerable people receive the support to enable them to maintain a tenancy, and that landlords are providing that appropriate level of service. Because this is funded through housing benefit, there's also the issue of the spend from a public pound there. So the fact that there is a funding round here that we can bid into to meet our need, which we know is prevalent in the city, is really positive. So again, Cabinet is being asked to approve submission of a bid up to 600,000 for this particular initiative. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Two things. One, in relation to chatbots, some of Cabinet got the meaning of that wrong in the first place, but I think we've rectified that now, and we're all fully aware of what a chatbot is and got it right. But and I'm sure it will be advantageous to the public in their attempts to get in touch. In relation to the bid, the housing fund bid, and I think you may be aware, we had a letter today from the Housing Minister complimenting you on the quality of the bid, and looking forward to working with the department going forward as an exemplar for exactly what it is they're trying to do. So congratulations on that, and it'll be an absolute, in my view, no-brainer not to pursue that going forward. So congratulations on that. Any exec scrutiny resolved to note the report last night? Any other comments, questions? No. With that in mind, then we can probably accept recommendations 2.1 and 2.2. Okay. Item 19, and I dare not forget on this occasion, the performance monitoring report header out there in the background, patiently waiting to tell us how we're doing.
Thank you, Chair. Last but not least, this report presents the Q2 performance, so from April to September, and sits alongside item 17, which is the financial monitoring report. This is the first monitoring report against this year's council delivery plan, and it brings out highlights against our priority areas of green, growth, vibrant and resilient. The report includes some updates to the delivery plan. We did say it was a dynamic document, so paragraph 4.5 highlights the changes that we are proposing to make. But fundamentally, overall, I think the performance report really does highlight the amount of work that is going on to actually deliver against the priorities. So if we look at the kind of the scores on the doors, in terms of our quarterly targets, 71% had met or exceeded the target at the end of September, and 75% of those measures are forecasted to achieve the annual target by the end of the year, which is positive. 78% of our priority milestones or actions were on track or completed, and 5 of those milestones have actually been completed over the last quarter, and they're shown on page 1 of the appendix. Overall, I mentioned that there'd been a considerable amount of delivery, and I think some of those achievements have been highlighted at paragraph 4.8 and 4.9. So in particular, things that I would point to are an increase in the amount of recycled waste, which is actually the highest position since June 2020. Over 50 jobs and 50 businesses have been supported. Derby has achieved the UNESCO Learning City as well over the last few months. As Derby has also seen a range of cultural events, so in particular the Darley Park Weekender with some really good attendances there. And just from a resilient point of view, we've also increased our prevention activities in terms of homelessness. So again, the report, and I would point people towards the appendix, does contain an awful lot of detail about the various activities and performance measures that we regularly report on. I did mention, I was going to say the report does also include some of our strategic risks, and it's worth saying that 1 new risk has been added and 2 risks have been removed. So they are highlighted in the report. 2 risk scores have also been reduced, so that relates to project management and also our statutory duties in respect of domestic abuse, which is good. It's worth noting that we do have a risk around cost of living, and actually considerable activity has taken place over the last few months in terms of agreeing a partnership strategy and action plan to try and mitigate the risk of cost of living on our local communities. The report does highlight some key areas for improvement that are in line with the strategic risks. So that includes the council's budget pressures. It also refers to sickness absence as well. And it's worth noting that the performance team are working with HR colleagues on a performance review of sickness absence, which will be reported to SLT and Cabinet in due course. So recommendations are shown at 2.1 to 2.4, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Heather. Again, thank you for such a detailed report. It is absolutely vital that we keep our eye on the ball in relation to the rest of the business of the council when we're so busy with things like the budget, with the cost of living crisis, with combined authority arrangements, boundary and constitutional reviews, all out elections, you name it, it's all going on. But we need to keep a focus on the day job in terms of outcomes and recognise positive measures too. So thank you for that, and long may that work continue. Any comments or questions around it, Councillor Barker?
Yeah, can I just reiterate what you just said, Chair? In as much that I'd like to thank Ellen and the team for continuing to work this very difficult monitoring through. When you think about all the different jobs that the council do and how it takes, or the time it takes to keep the finger on the pulse in relation to all these items, and then to display it in what has become a fantastically easier methodology in relation to being able to look at the different things. We are, as I say, on the right track in relation to many of the jobs that we often forget in relation to this council's work, because we are also dealing with the big ones as well. But it's some of these that are bread and butter of the council and what the people see out there as well. So thanks to the team again for keeping us on the straight and narrow.
Yes, thanks, Alan. So, we're moving on then, if we can agree, recommendations 2.1 through 2.4. Can they be agreed? Okay. Good. Item 20 then is the exclusion of press and public, to resolve that the council cabinet resolve that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. And as usual, reading that out is just allowed enough time to clear the off.